Today is October 31st, 2021, and we're at the FANHS Museum, and we are going to be interviewing Albert Juanitas, and he is going to be talking about his life, and hopefully you'll hear some interesting stories. So, without further ado, and also this is being recorded, so if anybody doesn't want their face shown on camera, on the Zoom link, just turn your cameras off. And mute yourself if you don't have any questions to ask at this time. All right, here we go. Here's Albert Juanitas.
My name's Albert Paris Juanitas. My father's name was Cyril Yonke Juanitas, born in Antique on the island of Panay in the Philippine Islands. My mother's name was Mary Paris, and she was born in Spain, about 150 miles west of Madrid. Offhand, I can't remember the name. She left Spain 1912, I think, near Gibraltar, and they went around the Horn to Hawaii, and she spent 1912 to 1920 there, and then she came to California, San Leandro, and then to Stockton in 1924, where she met my father. My father left the Philippines in 1913, went to Hawaii, and in 1916 he got on a ship and he jumped ship in San Francisco, and since the Ennebrads and his relative were living near Salinas, he went over there and worked for a year. And then he came to Stockton, roamed around, like Woodland, Sacramento, went to Idaho, and then he landed in Stockton, where he owned a business where he met my mother. She worked for him. So they got married, and he was contracting in Terminus on the Westgate Ranch, where I was born in 1930, on a house on a dirt road that didn't have a name then. It has a name now, Glasscock Road, near Terminus. About that time, they bought some land on Cherokee Road.
Yeah, looks like it.
It was about 16 acres, and he had cherries and grapes there. He was still contracting all over. In 1939, he was running a asparagus packing shed on Roberts Island, and they had a big outfit there because they had about 5 cutting crews. The Ennebrads were one of the crews, and I was 9 years old, but I remember George, Eddie, and Dump, I think his name was John. That's the only ones I remember. And my cousin Hale Rivera had another crew, and there was 4 or 5 crews. And they had enough guys that they used to play baseball on Sunday. I don't know how many teams they had. I'd be over there playing marbles. Also in 1939, my dad, after the asparagus, he had pear orchard in Marysville that he contracted with, and I went over there one weekend to help to cook, and all I did was sweep the floors, I remember. And I remember it was hot in the daytime and cold as hell as the night. I'm glad I never went back. Then in 1942, my dad there was gas rationing, and he couldn't travel around because he didn't have enough gas, so he got a permanent job as a contractor on Kroll's, I think that was the name, big ranch. Mainly they had celery. And in 1942, my dad packed us all up and moved us there to, there was a house, it had been a Japanese camp, but since 42 when all the Japanese left, the Filipinos moved in, and there was a house there that our family lived in, and then there were 2 bunkhouses and a great big kitchen. The cook slept in part of it, and I slept in the little room next to the kitchen, you might say. And that's where I went to grammar school at Terminus in 1942, where I learned how to drive a Model A. And then my dad let me drive the old Chevrolet 32 Chevy to school a couple of times. And that was on what is now Highway 12, but then it was just Terminus Road, because it never went across to Bolden Island. There was no bridge there, just a ferry. Anyway, then I went to Lodi High in 1944, and there were 5 Filipinos in the whole school. Sonny Estante, Felisa Capillo, Dorothy Estoloso, a guy by the name of Richard Gasser, who a lot of people know, and then myself. 45, we moved into, the war was over, so my dad bought a house on California Street, and I went, he also bought a hotel where I stayed upstairs as the night clerk. And so during the day I used to go to Edison High, where one day I met 4 guys that I would be friends with, but it was not a friendly meeting. David Rico stole my white handle grips off my bicycle and put them on his, and I knew where they were because I had my initials on them. So I took them off and put it on my bike. I turn around, here's David Rico, Woody Nava, Manuel Revelar, and later one of my best friends, a black guy named James Freeman. And I thought they were going to beat me up, but they had me a little scared. And then Meatball said, "Oh, let that guy go, he's okay." So I got away from it. A year later, when 1947, when they had formed a youth club, Filipino youth club, they were all my best friends. We all played basketball together. That's when they had all the teams from Stockton, San Jose, Salinas, San Francisco, the team down South 99, Livingston. And they even had a team from Rio Vista. A lot of people forget that. For a little 1 year they did. So anyway, we had a first tournament they ever had. Basketball was in Salinas, 1947, and then in 1949, I think we had one. But our team captain, who was a pilot in World War II, he flew B-25, his name was Pete Galvez. Thank you. He got killed in a crash, so the tournament was in his honor. the team I played for kept on when a bunch of us, like David Rico and myself, were inducted into the U.S. Army in 1950 during the Korean War. And the team went on with Pascual Fidel and his brother, and the Reyes brothers, and Jimmy Fontanella. They're the guys that took over. Bobby Lee Kong. I don't know if Dintoy was there or not. Rebel. Anyway, we went to war, and when we came back, we started another team called the Gauchos, and that was the older David, Rico, Revelar, Tommy Espinita now, myself, and we picked up a couple of white guys, I think. Robert Dyro, he passed away last year. Anyway, and most everybody is gone. Oh, Abraham Amon was there. And, anyway, almost all are gone now except David Rico, myself, and Abe Amon. We're all in our 90s. Abe's the oldest, he's 93, I think. Anyway, I was going to mention my Korean War service. I was in, 4 Filipinos left Stockton it was March the 30th. And we took 90 of us and went by bus to 3 bus loads to Fort Ord. And it was Frank Acoba, Carlos Los Santos, David Rico, and myself. We all trained together, and we all ended up in Korea together. I saw Frank Acoba, he had it made. He worked for the finance, paying off all the troops in Korea. And we went to pick up the payroll, and there he was. He came out of his tent and said, "Hey, Alan, what you doing here?" And I said, "I'm picking up the payroll." And he says, "You want a beer?" And I said, "Hell yeah." And in the tent, they had carpeted floor, and in the back, they had a refrigerator. Talk about having it made. Anyway, I came home, 52. Then I went back to school, and then I went on a job working for Chase Chevrolet, and they went on strike. And Tommy Espinita, who had been working for the city since he got out of Cal Poly, he said, "Why don't you take a test?" So me and David both took a test for the city, and I got on. I had to give 2 weeks' notice to Chase Chevrolet, and then I went to work for the city of Stockton in probably May the 23rd, somewhere like that, 1953. I went in as a rod and chainman, which was right at the bottom. 38 years later, I retired as a city surveyor. David Rico had taken that test with me, and he came in. He worked for the Parks and Rec for a while, and then he transferred to the survey crew with me. And so for a while, we had a Filipino survey crew. It was Tommy Espinita was the boss, me, David Rico, and Abe Amon. We had a couple of white guys to fill out the crew. Like I say, they were all past. Everybody, and they took a picture in 1958, and it's roving around somewhere. And everybody has passed except 3 Filipinos: David, Abe, and me. Now, when I got married, first marriage was in 1955, and I had 2 sons, Mark Juanitas and James Juanitas. I got divorced, and then later on I married a Rusher, Joy Rusher, and we were married for 34 years. She passed away 13 years ago, and I've been by myself for 13 years. I live on the farm, 16-acre farm, but I don't farm. I lease it out, and their money pays my taxes, so I don't have to worry about taxes. The only thing now I do, I got gout about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, so I quit bowling. My father-in-law died about the same time I quit fishing. I did golf with the city for a while, and then I got tired. It didn't interest me. I got tired of chasing that little white ball. So I did nothing to do but gamble. So I did see, I went to a funeral once with Al Arkham when he passed away, and in his coffin, he had in his hand a heart flush. So I remember that. Anyway, when I go, I'm going to have a 7-card diamond flush, because about 8 years ago, I had a 7-card flush in Jackson, and I won over $40,000. So when I'm buried, I want to have 7-card flush with me. Maybe it'll help me in heaven. I don't know. So nowadays, I go basically to Jackson about once a week, and my sister's daughter, well, I can't remember her name, but she's sitting next to me, Terry Torres. She drives me up once a week, and if she's not around, I have to drive myself. But every time I go up, I get a crack in my windshield driving down Clements Road, so I try to stay away from Clements Road. It's a kind of a lonely life, being 91, living alone, so I don't, like I say, I don't travel much. I eat, if it wasn't from a can opener and a microwave oven, I'd be in a hell of a fix. But my older son, Mark Juanitas, he comes every Saturday, and he brings me food that I can, give me enough so I can freeze some of it and maybe eat all week on it until the next Saturday when he comes. Now, I can tell you a lot of stories. One story is that when I landed in San Francisco from Japan, I came across on the General Meigs, and there was a Filipino carpenter on that ship. His name was Villanueva, I think it was. Started with a B. But he had worked for my father in the 30s on the farm, and then he became a carpenter, and he worked for military transport. So he on the ship, he saw my name. And no, actually, I met him on the deck before we sailed, and then he found my name from the officer or wherever, and he came down to where I was, and he got me to his quarters on the ship. He stayed with the bosun's mate, and so I could go in there and read books he had. I could take a freshwater shower, and all the Filipinos and Chinese would use it as a gambling room at night. So they played cards until 1 or 2 in the morning. Then I would go to sleep. and he gave me a pair of khakis so I could roam around and look like one of the crew. And none of the Army guards would bother me. And the only thing wrong was the last night before we landed in San Francisco, he was looking, his name was Mateo. He was looking for me because he invited me to the captain's supper, but he couldn't find me because some sergeant had got me for KP duty Friday morning before we came into port. So I went down there with him. The mess sergeant wasn't around, and two guys were breaking two big boxes of eggs for breakfast for 3,500 guys on board ship. And I said, hey, where's the mess sergeant? He said, he's out of here. And I said, well, they haven't taken my name, so I'm going to take off. And he said, go ahead. So all the rest of the night, I just roved around the deck. And that's why Mateo couldn't find me. I saw him a couple years later, and he told me, I was looking for you. You could have had a captain's dinner that night. The next morning, we come in, 2 gangplanks, 3,000 men on one gangplank, 300 Californians on the other one. So all Californians got to go down a certain gangplank, and at the bottom there was my sister's and David Rico's wife-to-be. No, that was his wife. He'd gotten married before he left. So anyway, Vera Rico, she was there, and they greeted me. And then I got the last boat to Camp Stoneman, and my sisters were waiting for me when the boat got there, and they picked me up, and we came to Stockton, and I had to be back at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I saw my dad, and he was on El Dorado Street in a card room playing cards. Palalasi, I think it was. And when I come up, he said to me, where you been? And I said, Korea, I just got in. He knew it, but he didn't want to make a big fuss. The next morning I go back, and all of my buddies that I'd come on the ship with from my outfit, this was 2 days before Christmas, they had all flown to New York, to Oklahoma, to wherever. I never saw any of them. I never saw them again. And so I went to Fort Ord, and I saw Carlos Los Santos there, and he got home early, so he was working as a clerk somewhere. And anyway, we all got, Tony Arteaga was there, and he had just come in from Germany, and he had to serve 24 months as a draftee. He got drafted at the same time as James Freeman. But if you went to Korea, you got out in 21 months. You went to Germany or any place else, you had to serve 24 months. So we got out the same day, and that was the end of my army. I came home, and then I had to go back on the 27th, and then I got discharged on the 30th of December. And that's when later that year, I went to work for JAAA and then the city of Stockton.
Why don't you go ahead and talk about working in the fields with your dad and the crew and all that?
Well, in
different times.
Well, 1942, I was 12 years old. Actually, in 42, before we moved to Terminus, there was a Filipino guy that was contracting or leasing the farm, and he'd grown onions, and I went and topped onions for a few days. That was the first job I ever did. I think he paid $1.30, 35 cents an hour. But when we moved to Terminus, I worked in celery, and I think we were making $1.85 an hour. And Lucy and and picked the seedlings. They put them in boxes, and then they took them to the planting machines. And they were running 2 machines. And my sisters worked one machine, I was on the other. There's pictures of them on that machine. And after they planted them, and the celery started growing, then you had to, they didn't have weed killer, so you had to go and scrape between the celery plants. And they call those, I think they call them scrapers. I brought one here to the museum. Anyway, and then after that comes, when after celery grew up, in the winter, around December, they would go harvest them. And my dad was running the packing shed. And that's where I worked. In Christmas vacation, I used to work as a, what they call them, waiter or swamper, on the belt where they put the washed celery and would come through, and then you'd peel them, and then you'd give them to the packers. And I was kind of my dad would put me in different jobs. I'd do that, or I'd go put the labels on the boxes, or else if there were a lot of waiters and no packers, I would get the pack, but I'd get the small little runny celery. All the other guys got the big ones. Now, they used to nail the boxes that they shipped. Well, one of the nailers was a guy, his name was Ramon Cesar. He had a son that used to come on Christmas, maybe, vacation, and he'd help his dad stack the slats. So his dad, and put the nails in a box so his dad didn't have to stop and pack the nails in the box or put some slats. I don't know if you know him, but his name was not Ramon, it was Raymond Cesar. He later, about 50, 60 years later, he became city manager of Stockton. At that time, I didn't know him because he was 12 years old and I was 14. I was a big boy. But I knew who he was. Later on, he went to work for the city in the traffic department, but we still didn't know each other, except later on, the city had a softball team, engineering against whatever. Oh, actually, we played City League, and Ray was the pitcher. It was slow pitch ball, and I was the shortstop. Anyway, like Sonny Stockton in high school, he was a junior, and I was a freshman, so we didn't really commute with each other until we joined the softball team with the Filipino club here in town. Again, he was outfielder and I was second base, I think. When I used to work, afterwards, when I came to town, in 1946, my dad didn't have any contracting job because he was working the hotel and he was running a gambling house, the Manila Club on El Dorado Street across from his hotel. So I worked in 1946. I worked for the Horladors across the street. That was Felisa Capillo's stepdad. I worked there, and they were all Iloilo Circle guys in 46. And then in 47, I worked picking pears up in not Walnut Grove, it's Walnut Creek, is that it? Up in near San Francisco, across the bay, close to Oakland. They had pears up there, And again, it was the Iloilo team, and that's where I met Gloria Nomura's dad. So what's his name? Corrido, Leo Corrido. That's where I met him. And then that same year, I went to work in Biola near Fresno, making raisin. 2 years later, in '49, I went back there to work in raisins again, but different outfit. David Rico's stepdad had a contract on a vineyard up there, and I took David Rico was dad ran it, so I took Emmanuel Revelar, James Freeman, and Cesar Gabonia. And after one day, Freeman didn't want to work no more, so I had to come back to Stockton, drop him off, and drive back to Biola. But since I had worked in '47, I knew what to do. When I got there, Meatball and Cesar had never done it before, so I came back and I finished my row before they finished theirs. So we worked there for a week or so, and then we came home. '48, I didn't. I must have worked for my dad delivering groceries from his grocery store, and then in '49, that's when I went back to Fresno. And I don't know what else I did. I just bummed around probably. We used to, a bunch of us got together one time and we did some nighttime shopping. We drove all over there by 8 Mile Road. I don't know what track it is. And we were looking for stuff to pick up for nothing, you know, and we hit a barn and got all their potato sacks, about 1,000 of them. And we were scared coming home, so I turned my lights off on the car. There were two cars. And I had all the sacks in my car, and me and Meatball were driving 8 Mile Road. Well, in 1948, on 8 Mile Road, there was not too much traffic, but it had rained earlier, and we were going over the Dipson thing, and we went over one hill, could have been a railroad, and we hit this water flowing across the 8 Mile Road. Anyway, when we got West Lane, we drove in on West Lane, and we stashed all the sacks in a garage there on Lafayette and El Dorado. It was a Japanese guy, Joe Kawada. He owned a gas station, and he had a basement there, and we threw them all in the basement, and then we took them out and sold them to a junkyard that was on Center and Santa Fe Railroad. And we sold the best ones to him for 3 cents a sack. I didn't, but a couple of guys did because I was working. So the next day when we were off, we got the rest and we took it to a sack guy on Main Street east of Filbert Street, and he bought them for a nickel a sack, so we made a few bucks. But another time we were having a dance, the club was, and they were talking about picking up some women somewhere to bring to the dance. And nobody knew, any other women, but Joe Uriarte, he was married, but when he was younger, I guess he used to run around a lot, and he knew about some couple of sisters in Brentwood. So 4 or 5 of us took a ride to Brentwood, and I got the picture of one of the girls, and she was cute. Anyway, we came back at night, and we were driving around Roberts Island on that windy road, not on the levee road, but we came around the curve in the road, and we see a car in the ditch. In the ditch, this couple of tires spinning. So we stopped, and they got my tools out of the trunk, and I just drove up and down the road. There wasn't too much traffic. And they went and tried to see what they could get, midnight auto supply. And all they could get was the Kleenex dispenser and the 2 tires. Well, we found out later the 2 tires were retreads, so we didn't get too much. I ended up selling the tires to my cousin, my first cousin. It fit his car. I think we made $10 or $20. Anyway, that was so much for that story.
What about when the prisoner of war guys that were working in the fields that you had to
The what?
supervise? The POWs.
Oh, yeah, about 1944, there was on Bolden Island, the camp, the last time I went back, it's still there. The camp is, but the U.S. government took it over and they put fencing around it and 2 guard posts, and they had about 40 or 50 German prisoners that had been captured in North Africa in 1943, I think. And in 1944, they were farming them around to the farms. And my foreman, he told me, he said, I got a job for you. So he took me over to Bolden Island, and there was a celery seed farm there, I guess. And I had to show these German prisoners how to pull the seeds, shake the dirt, top them off, and then pack them in the tomato lug box so they could transfer them to whoever was planting them. And they didn't know English except all the cuss words. That's all the English they knew. And then for lunch, I remember they would give the guard, there were only 2 guards, I think, and they would bring about 30 loaves of bread and 1 big sliced roll of salami, and that's what they would have for lunch. And then 10 gallons of water, I think. But I guess we were feeding them better than they were feeding our prisoner of war. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Another thing I forgot to say was one time me and Meatball went to work in Lodi for Johnny Latosa, loading tomato lugs, the field packs. And I was on the ground and Meatball was on the truck. And yeah, I was throwing them up. And I was kind of slow and they were moving the truck and the damn truck ran over my foot. Lucky the ground was soft and it sunk down, but it sure burned for a couple of days. I used to get lunch when I went, I was hoeing onions out in Thornton. And to get lunch, I'd go down to one of the Roma Inns, or Roma lunch counters. And that was owned by Alex Spanis's dad and uncle. And you could buy brown bags from them to go out there and eat for lunch. And then I also picked cucumbers out on East Main. But same thing, one day, that was good enough for me. But my father-in-law, Jimmy Romero, he was a contractor also, and he used to contract the wine picking grapes in Lodi. And he asked me to come out on weekends to be a gopher. I would help the truck driver was his, a bus driver was his foreman. And we would drive the workers, he'd pick up on Skid Row, and they were a bunch of winos mostly. And he would drive them out there, and I would punch their cards when every time they had a lug filled with things, they would jump in and I'd punch the card. And then I'd go get their hamburgers for lunch. Well, on Kettleman Lane, there was a cheap hamburger joint, and they'd give small hamburgers. Well, I knew a place on Cherokee Lane in Lodi that would give you big hamburgers for the same price. So I run into Lodi, and when I come back and give it to those workers, boy, they were happy. That was probably their first, that was their, probably their breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because they got paid every day. And then they would go in and we'd drop them off on Center Street, and or no, it was Commerce Street. And then they would go over to the tavern there or someplace. I don't know if they ate. But one thing I learned that about Social Security, that if you made $150, they would start taking Social Security. So these guys would keep track of how much they were getting paid for each slug, and when they got to $149, they would tell my father-in-law, says, put me down under this Social Security number. They pull out another card, different name. So so when they got to $300, they might pull out another card, because they didn't want to get any money deducted. They all wanted to drink their money. The only ones that didn't were younger guys that were looking ahead, or family people that were looking ahead, and they would take out their Social Security money. I don't know what else.
Well, maybe this is a good time to stop, because it's been a while, and later on we'll go back and have you describe like Little Manila and all that stuff, but that could be another time.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Fat City.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm just gonna go over here like this.
Is it off?
No, not yet. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This again was our test setup, and hopefully you guys can tell me good or bad things that, give me some critique, email me, and then there's good enough stories and stuff. I will put it up on our the museum's YouTube channel. We did videotape it also, so we'll look into that and see how it all turns out. So I thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you guys when we see you. So thank you and goodbye.